So welcome to this evening's program. This is the first of our bicentennial series. This is Wilmington, where the mountain and river meet. The first view you see is Whiteface and Esther, and the program is produced by the Wilmington Historical Society. So we'll go on to the next one. Okay, because this isn't. Okay. First of all, Native Americans lived in the region. We think that this is our bicentennial 200 years, but Native Americans inhabited this area for over 10,000 years prior. They lived in this region since the end of the Ice Age, thousands of years before European explorers arrived on these shores. Various tribes populated parts of what's now New York State. Iroquoian peoples arrived between 1200 and 4000 years ago. Both the Mohawk and the Oneida considered the Adirondacks to be part of their territory. The Algonquin-speaking Mohicans also claimed the mountains as their lands, particularly the area east of Lake George to southern Lake Champlain. Native Americans inhabit the Wilmington area at the base of Whiteface Mountain, right at the base of Whiteface Mountain. According to H.P. Smith, on the history of Essex County, 1885, when Amos Avery, one of our town founders, arrives in Wilmington in 1822, he notes that about 2 miles south of town, there were a number of Indian wigwams. So that means that that was right at the base of Whiteface, on the other side of the river, on Whiteface. And according to Beauchamp, the Algonquin name for Whiteface is Wahoparatene, from it goes upward, or from something similar, which I can't see either. Wait a minute, let me reduce my, there we go. Or it means it is white, okay, at the top. This is the center of Wilmington Village before 1890. With a sawmill on the left and a grist mill on the right, and Whiteface Mountain in the background. The town was founded nearly 200 years ago by hardy pioneers. Soon grist mills, sawmills, were all in this area, and that's why Wilmington is here, right where the mountain and river meet, actually. Most settlers were farmers. They cleared the land for grazing pasture. Okay. Some Wilmington first. The first settler is Paul Thayer, a farmer. The first store is owned by Elias Wilson. The first mill is owned by Leonard Owens. The first school teacher is Esther Kellogg in 1839. Prior to that, children were taught at home. Other early settlers arrive. Among them are Cyrus Wilson, Isaac Peck, Alan Peck, Reuben and Daniel Hamblin, Daniel Ray, John Blanchard, Z. Gray. This photo is from is a Seneca Ray Stoddard photo. Seneca Ray Stoddard was a very famous photographer, and he took this photo in 1873 as he and his entourage were going up Whiteface Mountain and exploring the Adirondacks. So that's it. Wilmington/Jay's first hero. So Wilmington was part of Jay until 1822. And our first hero and Jay's first hero was Corporal Stephen Partridge. I missed his last name. Corporal Stephen Partridge. You can see it on the stone. He's one of the first soldiers to die in the Battle of Culver Hill at the Battle of Plattsburgh in the War of 1812. And his tombstone is located in Pleasant View Cemetery in Wilmington. So the battle took place on September 16th, 1814. So he's buried right here in Wilmington. Our hero, a natural born leader, Reuben Sanford, arriving with his wife from Connecticut in 1803. He is one of our town really big founders. He was the first industrialist in Wilmington. He established the Sable Iron Works, transporting the iron ore from local iron mines. He also erected the first store and served as Wilmington's first postmaster. He was a major in the War of 1812, became a hero at the Battle of Plattsburgh when his actions prevented the British from crossing a Plattsburgh bridge. He led the effort to erect the Methodist Church and serve as town supervisor. Eventually, he served in both the New York State Senate and the New York State Assembly from this area. So he was a big, a big influence. I'm going to, because he was such a big influence, I'm going to read a little bit more about him. This is from an article by Kim Smith-Dedham from the Press Republican. She wrote this in 2014 at the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Plattsburgh. Wilmington. Major Reuben Sanford is revered as the life of Wilmington. He risked life, limb, and liberty to both build and protect the earliest commerce here, much of it crafted by his own hands. Diligent and bristled with a pioneer spirit, he could ride a horse 99.5 miles a day from Wilmington to Clintonville to Cook's Forge, back to Clintonville to drop off 12 axes, on to Keysville, then to Westport, then on to Elizabethtown for a supervisor's meeting, and then back home by 9 p.m. Count it 100 miles, the major said of the journey, according to a letter written by one of his store clerks, N.B. Foote. He was famous in those days, Foote said in the missive, which was printed in the Plattsburgh Sentinel in 1890. Like one of old, he had lifted up the axes upon the thick tree, Foote wrote in a letter to Plattsburgh Sentinel in 1890. I can remember when he could sickle more grain, mow more grass, perform more of any kind of manual labor than any other man. As an instance of his skill with an axe, when a young man, he won a wager on a day's chopping of 12 cords of wood. At the turn of the 19th century, this town was still part of the town of Jay, its fields unfurrowed by horse-drawn plows, its ancient timbers uncut. Sanford was barely 21 when he first arrived here. He came to what is now Wilmington in about 1803. A couple miles south of town, he built a log house on a stream. In 1811, he and his wife moved to town. Historians are not certain where Sanford's log cabin was, but it's not hard to imagine what a pioneer must have seen in the raw, wild landscape. An untamed forest in the Ausable River, tough-rooted meadows stretched tight over rich soil, the rugged spine of Whiteface standing guard. Whether it was the landscape that pulled him or the desire to forge an entire town, Sanford established a potashery. That's using the ashes to make soap and those kinds of things. The first sawmill, 2 distilleries, providing enterprise for farmers who planted rye in nearby field. This was a really good rye growing area. And the lucrative supply of whiskey was a chief commodity in the War of 1812. Reuben Sanford he brought the whiskey with him when he went to the Battle of Plattsburgh. And at that time, the government had to provide, in addition to paying you, they had to provide your daily ration of rum or whiskey or something like that. So, so he provided it and made some money off of that. He built the first store and schoolhouse in the village, one enterprise leading to the construction of the next. Born in Connecticut in 1780, Sanford had traveled here from his father's farm in Poultney, Vermont, in his 20th year and married Polly Lewis, also from Poultney. Paulina and their first of 7 children, all daughters, was born in Jay in 1805, but died 6 months later. His youngest, Polly, was born in 1819, 5 years after the Battle of Plattsburgh. Sanford's years of military service began with a captain's post on the New York State Militia in 1806. He would have been just 25 years old. His power with an axe factored heavily in protecting Plattsburgh's forts in September of 1814. As a force of some 14,000 British troops bore down in 2 columns pressing toward the village, the men of Essex County Militia mustered. All of them from their area, all from this area, as well as in Clinton County and Essex County. My great fourth great-grandfather, Asa Lawrence, was among them. His men joined forces with US soldiers to stave off the British land advance among the Beekmantown and Lake Roads. Some 5,300 American soldiers and militiamen held their ground during those tenuous days. Battle records describe how on September 6th, as the militia fell back in calculated retreat, Major Sanford wielded an axe and chopped through the stringers holding the deck of the upper bridge crossing the Saranac River. It was the central river crossing of 3 sites the British tried to pursue in the 6 days of skirmishes before the naval battle began. One British bullet hit his axe and pierced the wood. Despite the deadly shower of grape shot, Sanford kept swinging steadily at the heavy timbers, disabling the crossing and preventing the Western column's approach to the fortifications. According to Foote's letter, the major said, "It's too bad to spoil such a good axe and hemlock nuts." The major was asked if he had been afraid at that moment under fire. "I did not think of that. To get the bridge down was most in my thoughts." In the years just following the war, Sanford established a substantial iron forge operation at what is now the Wilmington Dam. Nearby, he built a store and a tavern. He became the first postmaster in 1822 and a surveyor for Adirondack land purchases. In 1833, he built a large brick Methodist church in the center of town, largely by his own labor, and it still stands today. Along with his commercial enterprises, Sanford was elected to the state assembly in 1816 and 1817, to the Constitutional Convention in 1821, and served as state senator from 1828 to 1831. He was Wilmington Sound supervisor twice. Of course, might as well throw that in, right? And in 1834 and in 1836. There is not likely a more telling tale of Sanford's fortitude than his response to the freshet of 1830. A freshet is a sudden rush of water down a stream. As he attended the quarterly meeting of the Methodist leaders in Jay, a messenger arrived on horseback and advised Sanford he was needed at home. Severe flooding had washed away his forge, mills, and other buildings along the river. "If everything swept away at Wilmington, I can do no more good there and may as well stay here and serve the Lord," he replied. He turned to those gathered and said, "I've just received word that my forge and mills at Wilmington have been swept away by the flood. I thank God for the religion which fire cannot burn nor floods wash away." Sanford went on to rebuild the forge property after the floods. By 1854 or thereabouts, he had sold most of his holdings. The major moved with his wife to Columbus, Ohio to live with their daughter, Anne Sanford Bartlett, and her husband, John. Reuben Sanford died at age 74 there on May 9th, 1855, and is buried there at Green Lawn Cemetery in Columbus, Ohio. Quite a guy. That's our beginnings. So why are we Wilmington? So in March 27th, 1821, Danville is separated from Jay. Sounded like a good name, I guess. The first town meeting was held at the home of Reuben Sanford. But the United States Post Office had something to say about that because there was already a Dansville, New York. And they said, no, you can't have 2 towns of that similar name because of the post office. You'll never get your mail. So in 1822, a year later, on March 22nd, Danville was renamed Wilmington. Apparently, there are a number of people from Wilmington, Vermont, who came to this area, and so they named it after their former town. So Nathan and Levi Markham arrived in 1826 and established the hamlet of Markhamville, which had a store, a lumber mill, a blacksmith shop, a school, and a post office. In 1890, the name was changed to the hamlet of Hazleton. Wilmington native son Henry Harrison Markham, born in Wilmington in 1840 and attending local schools, becomes the governor of California. In 18, and I can't read this because I have all this other stuff here. 1890 something, 1890s. In the 1890s, he becomes governor of California. Another native son created a bridge design. This native son was Reuben Partridge. Lived up on Hardy Road. I was born on Hardy Road. This bridge design was patented in 1872, mostly in Ohio, is where all his patents were. After the local bridge design proved ineffective against road traffic and heavy rains. It became the standard for covered bridges built in central Ohio in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and more than 100 bridges were built. Some are still standing. In August of 1839, we had a kind of an adventurous young woman named Esther McComb. She's a local teenage girl. She made the first recorded ascent of the mountain, which was later named after her, Esther. In 1843, Wendell Lansing, a Whig editor and ardent abolitionist, sells his business in the Essex County Republican and takes up residence in Wilmington, engaging in various economic enterprises. He creates a station on the Underground Railroad, assisting fugitive slaves on their journey to Canada. This quote is taken from the North Country Underground Railroad Historical Association by Marjorie Lansing Porter. This is his granddaughter, I believe. She states from her Aunt Emma Lansing, well, I remember that my father's Aunt Emma Lansing, her name was, she was an old lady when I was a little girl, but she had lived here in Wilmington as a little girl, and she remembered that at night there would be Negroes around their place here at Wilmington, and in the morning they'd be gone, and she couldn't understand. Then she found out later when she grew up that her father, had hid them in the charcoal cart, and off they went, probably to Plattsburgh. The Rogers Hickok House, which is it's still standing. It's the blue house across from Whitegate, across from, if you know, Liz Miskowski. It's there on Springfield Road, the blue house on Springfield Road. Mm-hmm. Yep, right here in Wilmington. A Wilmington legend recorded in Story Chronicle and Song began with a prank on July 4th, 1850. When a group of men from the neighboring village of Blackbrook stole Wilmington's small cannon in jest. The cannon's disappearance was discovered as townspeople were setting up for Independence Day celebrations in the morning. Wagon tracks, however, were soon discovered leading toward the village of Blackbrook. The cannon was found, and with much bravado, the Wilmington men retrieved their cannon in time for the day's celebrations. A written whimsical Chronicles of Wilmington tells of the skirmish, and the legend grew as Wilmington and Blackbrook's good-hearted feud continued and became conflated over time with a bunch of other cannon thefts and all of that stuff over time. So a song called "The Stolen Gun" was also written, and to a melody of the time called Dandy Jim. This is a wagon in the of hay in Markhamville. Farming continued being the biggest economy, you know, farming and the milling, and that was still there for quite a long time, right up until the almost to the 1950s. This is a wagon load of pumpkins at harvest time at Winch's Mountain View Farm, which is also on out Springfield, very close to the Upper J line. So, taking a look at this, do you know what these are? Any guess? They look like deer. Yeah, they sort of look like deer. Can you look at the ears? Yeah, they're tagging their cows. So these are Wilmington's tags, and you had to record them, you know, with your town clerk to identify your livestock, whether it be a cow, sheep, whatever. So these are from the Wilmington Town Ledger from 1821 to 1865. It's a record of the brands of early Wilmington livestock. So the ears of each resident's livestock were marked in a specific way to identify each owner and then recorded in the ledger. So, and the cross-offs, what do you suppose the cross-offs mean? Means somebody sold off that brand to somebody else. They sold their cattle or their livestock to someone else. So you have like Levi Markham had this particular brand in 1821, it looks like. And then Truman Kilbourne picked up that brand in 1860, looks like 66. But I love the drawings and the eyes and this is Bonneview Farm in 1927. Small livestock was used at during that time period. You know, you could shear the wool and sell it. It was a good for cash. Forest provided resources for lumber, as we all know, and for building and all that kind of thing. So in 1897, we're starting to go from a 2.5 mile log slip from a holding pond on Whiteface Mountain, and that is still there, to the AuSable River is constructed. Well, no, the log slip's not there, but the pond is still there. Is constructed to safely move logs to the river. The steep slopes of the surrounding mountains are logged extensively to provide pulpwood for the J&J Rogers Company in AuSable Forks. So we went to, to pulpwood then. Later, local lore describes Asa Lawrence, a part-time logger and fire observer, riding down he decided to take a shortcut and ride a shovel down the log slip, and he made it all the way down. So it's part of our local lore. This is the west branch of the AuSable River in Wilmington. In the early 1920s, transporting logs suitable for pulp and paper manufacturing. They were sent downriver to J&J Rogers. Logging crews and special jam boats directed the pulpwood with their pike poles. And the last spring log drive, okay, the word is hidden. the log spring drive was in 1923. Hazelton Lumber Company was formed in 1901 by founding father Daniel Hazelton. Here the logs are waiting to be in a big pile to be sawn into lumber. Big log there. And of course, Wilmington had to, we had schools and churches and that kind of thing as well. So this is a well-known teacher, Wilmington village teacher Frank Shumway, surrounded by his students in 1907. A lot of kids there. And then the Wilmington Village School in 1912, which burned, by the way. It was built as a new school. And then a couple of years later, they had trouble, I guess, with the furnace or something along those lines, and it burned. So it was during the day, but everyone was safe. So then this is a picture of the Wilmington Village School in 1950s. So this was built after the other one burned. We had 3 churches. We now have 4, but though in the early days, the Methodist Church was built in 1833, as per the story of Reuben Sanford, and the Congregational Church was also built at almost the same time, a little bit later. That's now the Nazarene Church, and this is I believe this is Pastor John Urban standing here. St. Margaret's Roman Catholic Church was built in 1926, and shortly thereafter, a big windstorm came along and it ended up pushing the church over on its side. And they had to reconstruct it all over again. The founders were, one of the main founders was John J. O'Leary, who also built, if you go up a Whiteface Highway, on the left-hand side of the highway by Whitebrook, he built that there was a home in there built with stone that he had built. It is now burnt not too long ago. Ellison Minor Cooper, native son and successful Philadelphia businessman, organized a library in his hometown of Wilmington. He came back and decided that he wanted to build a library in his hometown. So he left a bequest in his will to provide the funds for building it in 1920. And that's our library today. The AGO, Help Each Other Club, is formed in around 1928. The organization was associated with the Ku Klux Klan, but not really racially motivated, because at that time, Al Smith was running for governor, and he was the first Roman Catholic governor. He was first Roman Catholic governor of New York State, and at that time he was running for president in 1928 as well. So they were anti-Catholic. Their first target in Wilmington is the Wilmington St. Margaret's Roman Catholic Church congregants. There was actually a cross burning on the property of one of its founders, John J. O'Leary. The perpetrators were found out and the KKK was disbanded. And later the building was used for many different things. The American Legion Post, the town hall, the library, the Waldorf School, and now it's under private ownership. In the meantime, Whiteface Mountain stood over all, keeping watch over everybody and everything, prominent in everybody's view every day. So in around the 1870s, or 1850s, 60s, 70s, people started looking at this area as for recreation and for healthful living and that kind of thing. So there were, and this is the 1859 guest register book of the Whiteface Mountain House, which was a hotel in the area. This is by a hiking party from Keysville. Dr. J.R. Romine is endorsing their guide, Andrew Hickok Jr., and his newly cut trail up the east side. So Andrew Hickok Jr. Built a new trail up the east side of Whiteface Mountain. And over time, George Weston makes improvements by adding a pony trail. No highway, remember? Just as mining, logging, and iron industry began to move westward because the mines started closing down and the Mesabi iron ore mines opened up in Minnesota. Just as mining, logging, and the iron industry began to move westward, authors who traveled to this area began to discover and write about its natural beauty and healthful benefits. And the age of tourism had begun. They started spreading the word, and authors, books, and photos, and Seneca Ray Stoddard was one of them, started talking about the area. So what do you notice about what these people are wearing? What are they wearing? Yeah, they're wearing their regular day-to-day or clothing. Look at those shoes. You hiked up, they took a pony perhaps and got a certain distance, and then they hiked the rest of the way. I'm guessing my feet would have hurt. And the women dressing with dresses climbing up through that. Kind of crazy, huh? Local hotel owners saw an increase in hiking adventurers and constructed an 1870 rustic house that's about, I think it's about 1,000 feet down from the top. That this was, and people could stay there overnight, or they could, they could look sunset viewing, sunrise viewing. And tourists wanted to see this, wanted also to see the scenic Wilmington Notch connecting Wilmington and North Elba, because the famous falls, High Falls Gorge was in the middle of that. Quite the wagon tracks there. And finally, in 1916, it was modernized for automobiles. So a major early attraction was High Falls Gorge. The many well-placed bridges and walkways allowed visitors accessible views of the wonders of the many potholes, cataracts, strata, and fissures, while also permitting them to hear the roar and feel the spray of the falls. The height of Whiteface Mountain and its 360-degree view from the top provided early fire detection from its fire lookout tower. The fire tower on the top of Whiteface Mountain was constructed in 1909. Removed in 1970, it's currently located at the Adirondack Experience Museum in Blue Mountain Lake. And the West Branch of the AuSable River provided a recreational paddling and all kinds of recreation for people. This photo was taken in about the 1920s. And winter recreation included ice skating on Lake Everest. So this was taken, I think, in 1954, this photo. The Owasso Club. Owasso Club means bluebird in the Native American language. And in 1920, Clara Merrill, along with her sister Martha Brown, established the Owasso Club for young people in Wilmington in memory of Mildred. If you look to the left, you can see Clara Merrill with her daughter Mildred. And about 1915, Mildred died unexpectedly in an automobile accident in about 1917. And then so her mother and aunt had started the Bluebird Club, and then it became a much bigger deal. They built a building, and for many, many years, it was open to children and then finally to adults, and summer people could join, and you could join the Owasso Club and be part of all the activities of that. This happens to be a dance party, a costume party. Fishing on the AuSable River was always popular. Francis Betters, the famous fly fisherman legend, built a shop which featured fishing, camping, Adirondack craft items. His shop became a famous destination for anglers for over 40 years. And he himself was inducted into the National Fly Fishing Hall of Fame. Many people have Fran Better stories. As tourists began coming to Wilmington, they needed a place to stay, and the Storrs House also provided a store. This building is the only one of the old hotels still standing, and it's the oldest building in Wilmington. That's across the street from the Methodist Church in Wilmington. This is on Hazelton Road, across the street from the church. You can notice that it has a widow's walk on the top. We're not sure why, but this photo was taken in about 1873-ish. Other hotels included the Bliss House above and the Olney House to the right. Both of those photos were taken in about 1900. The most popular hotel in Wilmington for at least 80 years was the Whiteface Mountain House. In a 1916 travel guide with Frank E. Everest as proprietor, the popular house offered airy rooms, and terms were $10 to $14 a week. It had burned down, actually. It had burned in 1906, and he rebuilt it. If you can see in this photo, right here, it says the new Whiteface Mountain House. But on maps you can see that there had been a Whiteface Mountain House prior, and he just expanded upon it, added a floor. Right, for Fratelli's is right on the corner. In the early 1950s, with everybody, has a car now, and that's one of the things that also changed tourism is the automobile. Everybody was free to come to the area, so that's started flooding the hotels and that kind of thing. And so the hotels, and with the attractions that were here, Santa's Workshop and all of that, how many motels were built that they became popular at the time over hotels. Restaurants opened to accommodate the tourists, and this is the Blue Bowl, which is now the Hungry Trout. It was established by two ladies from Philadelphia. Up in the top left-hand corner, you can see a photo of Frank Everest. He was a mover and shaker in the town during the early 1900s. He built the Whiteface Mountain House, which is right here, if you can see my arrow. And here's the dam. There have been several dams in this site since Wilmington, since the earliest settlers arrived. A dam was first used for mechanical power for mills. It started off as, as the old, then for electricity in the 1920s and for recreation after the 1930s. Frank Everest built an airfield, an airport for commerce and tourism. It had 2 runways and an office and was located on the west side of the Ausable River, right where, well, currently it's at where North Pole Campground is, which is now the KOA North Pole Campground. Early users included barnstormers, businessmen, sportsmen, and a weekly air service by Albany Air Service. In September of that year, a biplane crashed into the Nazarene Church. James Lawrence and Frank Hewitt were in the plane with the pilot, and it was preparing to land, and it spun, and it hit the steeple, I think, of the church, and that broke its fall, so that no one, they only ended up with broken bones. No one died. The Bonneview 9-hole golf course was created from pasture land in Wilmington. It's Doug Wolf's territory. With all of these tourists around, don't you think there'd be a better way to get to the top of the mountain? How do we get them up there? So that question started the town leaders thinking about it. And so how about constructing a highway up the mountain? So after much wrangling and various, going through various state agencies, et cetera, and an amendment and all kinds of things, it began construction in 1929, or actually the construction started in ground was broken, or it was inaugurated in 1929, September 11th, by the way. But it didn't really get started, the construction didn't start till about 2 years later. And this is the result. And it was dedicated on July 20th, 1935. President Franklin D. Roosevelt came to dedicate the highway. He's right there. And it was dedicated to all of the veterans of the Great War at the time, but it has since changed to be veterans of all wars now, because we've had World War II and more after. The castle at the top was, in the beginning, it was just a small, very small building at the top when you drove up Whiteface. But they created this building with a restaurant and restrooms and a much nicer appeal at the top. The Summit House included a memorial light supplied by veterans organizations. Whiteface is the 5th highest peak in the Adirondacks, and is unique because it has that 360-degree view. Lots of things happened there. The 1964 championship uphill sports car climb, uphill bike races, it's uphill foot race. It's used a lot for events. Events came into being over time. Everybody wants to go to the top faster in many different recreational fields. So this is what it looks like from the top, an aerial view. Here's the Whiteface Mountain Highway. Here's North Pole. This is the upper level, the Esther Trail, all these connecting trails. This was the very first, the Marble Mountain ski area, which was the Whiteface ski area, but on the Marble Mountain side. It was completed in 1948. This was the T-bar entrance at Whiteface Mountain Ski Center. Look at all the different attire than we wear now, right? Access to the upper ski trails required a ride up Whiteface Highway and a truck. Because in the beginning, the ski trails, you know, that's how you got to the top. So the Marble Mountain location had limited possibilities because, as he said, the lack of snow over there. So in 1958-9, the Whiteface Mountain Ski Center that we are familiar with currently was then constructed. Art Draper, a World War II medic with the U.S. Army 10th Mountain Division, is riding up with his dog. What was his dog's name? Because I can't see it behind the thing here. In 1958. This was taken in 1958. The old chairlift. This is the ski center as it was back then. The first few years. And of course, in 1980, you know, it was turned into these the venue, the alpine ski venue for the 1980 Winter Olympics at Lake Placid. And then going back in time a little bit, Santa comes to town one day and he converses with three wise men left to right, Otto Monaco, Julian Rice, and Harold Fortune. And together they brought to life the concept of Santa's Workshop. Former Disney artist Otto Monaco from nearby Upper J designed the village. Harold Fortune, a log cabin builder from Lake Placid, provided the land and oversaw the construction of the buildings. Santa and Rice provided the inspiration and direction, and Santa's Workshop was born. The legendary North Pole in the center of the theme park with Santa and a reindeer. Kind of a skinny Santa. And many other characters were added to the festivities and the many shows and that kind of thing. Entertained everyone at Santa's Workshop. It was the first theme park of its kind in America. And then Santa reaches out to those less fortunate. Operation Toy Lift began in 1949 as a way to give to those less fortunate. Above Santa, you can barely see Santa, but there he is. Stands in front of all the toys that need to be delivered to underprivileged children. And then in 1952, Esso Standard Oil Company provided the plane. So this is a big plane. And they still collect money for needy children. In the early 2000s, Wendy Hall and her husband Steve came to Wilmington with a passion for assisting injured wild animals, and they opened the Adirondack Wildlife Refuge and Rehabilitation Center on Springfield Road next to the Ausable River. And as many of us are familiar, Wendy's recently passed away, and while the purpose remains much the same for the refuge, its purpose has changed because of many circumstances beyond anybody's control. And then in the early 2000s, mountain biking came to Wilmington. We've had a lot of governors visit our little tiny town. Our town's only ever had 1,200 people, but we seem to attract people. Governor Averell Harriman in 1958 to dedicate the ski center. George Pataki in 2002. And this is Governor Andrew Cuomo in 2014. And Governor Herbert Lehman when North Pole was opened. We've also had presidents visit Wilmington. Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1935 to inaugurate. He inaugurated the highway as governor, and then dedicated it in 1935 as president. And then in 2002, President George W. Bush came on to do some work, I guess, at oh my gosh, yeah, on the trails. And this was oh my gosh, what's the day? No, not Arbor Day. Earth Day. Thank you, Earth Day. That escaped my mind for some reason. And then here's Olympic silver medalist Jean Ashworth meeting with Senator John F. Kennedy, who then became president. Fly fisherman and Jeannie Ashworth is in the Speed Skating Hall of Fame. Fly fisherman and guides Fan Betters once received a phone call from President Jimmy Carter's White House to go fly fishing. But that trip got canceled for some reason. And then Santa and his elves were invited by President Eisenhower to participate in the pageant of peace in Washington, D.C. So Wilmington, where the mountain and river meet, and sometimes at the same time.